We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to our second meeting of the Motor Vehicle Stop Data Committee. We will call this meeting to order. Abigail, if you can take the roll call.
Yes. Sorry, give me a second. It turned off on me. Chief Nathan Anderson,
Present.
Deputy Director Cummins,
Present.
Chief Stephen Brush.
Here.
Crime Analyst Julia Chadwell. Sheriff William Jack Kurd.
Here.
Dr. Eric Fritsch.
Here.
Captain Adam Hooten.
Here.
Sergeant Eli Rivera.
Here.
Chief Deputy Salvador Rodriguez. Captain James Taylor.
Here.
Assistant Chief Vance Lucer.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you all for being here today for our second meeting. I'm looking forward to taking reports from the subcommittees. After our first meeting that we had last month, I got back home and I had a 103-degree fever and was diagnosed with the flu. So hopefully I'll be a little more energetic during this meeting today. So I had to fake it till I made it last meeting. But I feel really good today, so we'll get started on this. Any comments from the committee before we get started? All right. With that, has everybody had an opportunity to go over and review the minutes from our last meeting? Is there any discussion on the minutes from our last meeting?
One correction. On the second page where it breaks out the members of the subcommittees, we can add my name to the motor vehicle stop subcommittee, please.
Okay, so we're gonna add Assistant Chief Van Slusser to the Motor Vehicle Stop Data Subcommittee.
Yes,
And-
please.
Add me to be in here.
And what's that?
Add me to be in here.
Oh.
Like, to let me off the.
Being present.
We'll take care of those.
I think we just, yeah, we have a motion. I'll entertain a motion to accept the meetings with, accept the minutes of the meeting with the changes that were brought about.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes with the stated changes.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Do you have a second? We'll take a vote. We have a motion and a second, and we'll take a vote. So all in favor?
Aye.
And all opposed? The minutes pass with the changes that were presented. The next agenda item number 3, is discuss and take action on advisory committee procedural and preliminary matters if necessary. Does anybody have any discussion over our procedural and preliminary matters? With none, we'll move on to agenda item number 4. Agenda item number 4 is receive the following subcommittee reports and take action if necessary on motor vehicle stops, searches and contraband, and our miscellaneous subcommittee. We'll start with the motor vehicle stop data. Captain Hooten, will you be speaking for this subcommittee?
Sure.
Very good.
Yeah, so we met via Teams I don't remember the exact date. And we predominantly talked about in our discussion needing to look at and bring back to the full committee discussion on definitions such as what are we going to recommend in terms of defining motor vehicle stop and which types of vehicle stops, not necessarily what we're capturing motor vehicle stop data on, but for example, you're dispatched to a call for service and you make a motor vehicle stop based on that. What kind of criteria should be met in terms of what we're going to collect motor vehicle stop data on. We talked a few scenarios just amongst the subcommittee and those that were present in the meeting. But it's something that I think we're gonna need to discuss as a larger group, where we can get more ideas put out there in terms of scenarios, different kinds of calls that could come together. We always aren't gonna come up with every possible scenario, but we need to try to get it more standardized. So, I mean, just amongst the committee, our subcommittee, we found discrepancies in what we report, and that's just 4 of us. So, you expand that out to the whole state, and that's, not standardized at all. We also discussed, the location, the types of it, like Chief Brush had brought up in terms of, state highways versus local roads. What is more beneficial in terms of the data? Do we need to term if you're in a city or in the metroplex like where I work? Should those be more of the local roads as opposed to the state highways? I don't know. It just depends on what we want the data to capture. Is it more important to see it as an urban versus rural? Is it more important to see it as a state highway versus local road? So we discussed that, and help me out if I'm missing anything else, committee members.
Instruction sheet or a data dictionary.
Thank you. Yeah, we discussed the importance of recommending and putting together some sort of educational reference material that we can push out to the agencies to help with standardization. So there's not this gray interpretation that we've all done for years, but recommending something that we could put out that standardizes, similar to the book for CR3s or the reference materials for doing CR3s, crash reporting, things of that nature. We'd like to develop something by the end of this committee run where we can push something out educationally and have something for everybody to reference.
Thank you. All right, the searches and contraband subcommittee, Ms. Chadwell was chairing that, and who will be speaking on her behalf?
I'll give it a crack, and if I miss anything, Dr. Fritz will help me out.
Yep.
All right, so we looked at the categories of contraband seized, and I believe our recommendation was to just provide further definitions of what goes into those categories, such as alcohol, probably should contain open alcoholic containers and things like that as well. Currency, both currency and financial instruments that are seized. And then have some examples of what would go in the other category, such as humans that are smuggled in a manner that's against law, things of that nature. Additionally, the focus on where contraband was found, and how much multi-reporting. We focused on that the search should be on the driver. It's around that, so it should be documented on the driver. So one search for a stop. Did I miss anything on that?
No,
Okay.
no, that's it. And just counting more than one type of contraband, but that's allowed now.
That's right.
So-
Multiple selections. The contraband found should not be limited to one type of contraband per search, because you could obviously find multiple different types of contraband. There shouldn't be it doesn't necessarily need to equal the number of vehicle searches.
All right.
End of report.
And the third subcommittee was chaired by Dr. Melissa Cummins. Would you like to give our report?
Yeah, sure. So very similar to the other committees, we identified discrepancies in our interpretation of the words, not necessarily in challenges in agreeing what they should be or what they could be, but just differences in how they're applied within our agencies. We did discuss sort of what should be included in those traffic stops and this concept of whether traffic stop for the sake of moving vehicle versus previously being under surveillance or something like that and stopping. And also came to the conclusion that a data dictionary would be incredibly helpful for both analysts and researchers. We looked at a couple of formats of data dictionaries, and just for awareness, and moved that way as well, or plan to recommend that as a solution for the group. We discussed some other options, including potential for a narrative or something like that. We discussed the feasibility for some of those options in relation to agency size and how to remain scalable for larger agencies that might not be, might not meet the need. And then we also discussed briefly some comparative analysis, not necessarily what it should be, but just sort of what each agency is doing currently, just for comparison's sake. I believe that's all we had. That's all I have.
Is there any further discussion on the subcommittee reports?
I
Yes,
have something to add to our bit, I just remembered, I apologize. Defining which search to mark for an officer, the type of search. It should be the initial decision to make that search. We said that sometimes officers get confused and they've done a search incident to arrest, they do an inventory, maybe they started off with a probable cause search and it only accepts one of those things. So maybe further clear definitions and guidelines from the commission in their instructions to say the intent, the spirit is what made the officer decide to search, or what was the officer's first legal authority to search that vehicle was our recommendation. So defining it.
Sir.
Just an observation, since I'm not a committee member. But Dr. Cummins' group with the data dictionary and kind of a table, tabulated data dictionary, I think from our perspective is a wise idea. So as we start these definitions, that certainly helps in both the ultimately, if we do a training component based on this, those type of things, I think being privy to all three subcommittees, I think you're on the right track, defining things with more specificity, and it's just as important to define out things as it is to define in things. But we like the dictionary type approach to definitions, and we feel like it would also lend itself to sharing with the, for lack of a better, the RMS or ticket writer companies, to where they could literally have an info file if I got stuck, that maybe they could as a technology solution on the end, out where the rubber meets the road, you could put some of these things as long as they were concise, and officers could potentially have access to that on the side of the road.
I'd like to add to that as well, the discussion of a data dictionary for a user and a researcher, then kind of the translation of that for a vendor being a tech spec, right? So when we're asking for program logic to convert NIBRs within an RMS or something like that, there is an actual prescribed more technical guide that would say this response is either required, mandated, here are the options, and kind of limit that. It also would build in some logic where the tools that we're using could more closely align with a process or prevent fat finger or kind of miss error. I think we're probably using a lot of different applications or sources, and while we're producing ultimately what we believe is the same data set, I think we'd be really well supported if the vendors knew these changes were coming and what exactly they could do to support an agency ahead of the change. Very often I find that it's us teaching the vendor what we then need based on our interpretation of what is prescribed. So we did talk about that as a companion guide as well.
Daniel, would it be more appropriate to get into the meat and potatoes of like what Captain Hooten was talking about during this agenda item or the next?
I think it would work under either. You could take it as to taking action on those individuals, or you could say move to agenda item number 5 and just do robust discussion of each. So it's your call.
Okay. We'll move on to agenda number 5. Is there any more discussion on agenda item number 4? With none, we'll move on to agenda item number 5, discuss and take action on matters related to motor vehicle stop data. And Captain Hooten, for you specifically, if you want to get into some of your recommendations that you want to bring to the entire committee on some of the stuff that you discussed, we can open up that discussion.
Sure,
To
Chief.
you or your subcommittee.
Yeah, I'll start it off. One of the biggest components of our subcommittee is the motor vehicle stop itself and what defines that and what initiates the response to collecting the data. The more we discussed it, we went kind of all around all sorts of different scenarios, but ultimately we think the crux of what should initiate that motor vehicle data stop collection is the officer's self-initiated stop. I've decided outside of any other information provided by a reporting party, witnesses, anything like that of an offense, the officer's deciding to stop that vehicle for reasonable suspicion, traffic violation, whatever they've observed, that should be what initiates the collection of the stop data. And that was kind of what we decided to recommend. Now, even in that narrowing of the definition of what we're going to recommend initiates the collection of the data, there's still all sorts of other doors that could be opened up, circumstances and scenarios. So that's kind of what we decided. Just the few of us trying to decide a recommendation on this is not appropriate. We should probably bring it to everybody where we could discuss more minds what everybody thought on that. So for our subcommittee, that's where we'd like to start discussion with the whole committee.
We welcome discussion on this recommendation.
I think where we got into the part of the breaking it down was if you're watching somebody for a specific reason or whatever, and you do a reasonable suspicion stop, but then they don't have their driver's license or they don't have their insurance, and you issue them a citation, then you're collecting the data because it's on the citation, and the citation won't let you proceed without collecting the data. But then if you stop them and their traffic offenses are good, and you just stopped them for whatever suspicion you were watching them for in the first place, then you don't collect the data. So it still creates a gap. We're collecting and we're not collecting kind of on the same stop.
And then you have an agency like mine, so we don't collect our data via the ticket writers. So we collect ours on inside of our CAT RMS. So you initiate a traffic stop. One of the components before you can clear that stop is you have to complete all the data collection. So that creates problems for us as well. If you make an investigative stop on a vehicle and it's classified by the dispatcher as an investigation, which usually it is, that officer then has to realize that I need to go get that form myself. It doesn't automatically populate. So we went to that trying to do a better job of capturing more data. And I think in the end, we've created more of a headache. So the way that things are collected amongst agencies adds to the difficulty.
I'll have to agree with you. So when I went back and I talked to my sergeants to make sure that how we were doing it, we collect data for everything. And I didn't realize that we did everything. I was like, dang, how long are y'all sitting on these stops? They're like, well, you bought this software and it makes, we stop a car, we collect data. So, and I'm sure this is the case for other people with different softwares too, is there's no way to pull the data down and say, because when we run the racial profiling report, which we just run ours 2 weeks ago, of course it was a wreck because we changed softwares in the middle of the last year, but there's no way to pull out what was an investigative stop, what was a traffic stop. It was just stops because we document everything. I think the only person in my agency that does not document every single stop is me. Which I learned that through this process, is I said, well, y'all don't just do a verbal stop, right? And they're like, no. Like the rules say we document everything. Of course, I don't make that many stops, but that's not the point. I don't know how we would divest it or whatever to do it different. I don't know that like, I have no solution of how not to just get all of it. Yes, and it's a lot of work, but I mean, like anything else, once you get used to doing it. I don't know that there's a way, even if we made the rules saying you can't put investigative stops, how many agencies are gonna be like, well, my software does it, and so we're just gonna continue to do it. I mean, would we really change anything?
I think that another side of sort of that same point, or another interpretation perhaps, is we do report all stops. And the concern that we had in not reporting all stops was a challenge to whether we were reporting everything we were supposed to. And so perhaps we thought suggesting perhaps another reason stop, another option in that first reason to capture this subset of stops. If really what we're wanting to do is say initiating for a traffic stop versus a follow-in or continuing investigation, would that be maybe a happy compromise?
So, I like the way you phrase that. I think every agency and every different RMS system's out gonna try to solve the problem in a different way with whatever software they do or whatever the agency's primary focus is. And, you know, we're fortunate, we're pretty narrow and we do a lot of traffic stuff, right? But we also collect things on every single ticket that we write, whether they're passengers, drivers, things like that. We have to then exclude the passengers from our data pool and start doing that sort of thing. So I think some preamble type questions, leave it up to each individual agency to figure out how to solve the problem of what to report. But we would probably say, hey, was this a discretionary stop or not? Was this a driver or not? And then, fill out this information if so. But again, everybody's different records management systems are gonna guide you through that process differently with every single vendor. I think the best we can, one of the best things we can do is just provide clear definitions for everything and then provide those to our individual developers and say, this is what we are trying to get, and this is what we're trying to report. Program it that way for us, or configure it this way for us. But in lieu of unclear definitions, then we're all gonna report things slightly differently.
One thing that came up in the subcommittee for the definition of motor vehicle stop was a question regarding the reason for the stop. One of the options that's been there is pre-existing knowledge as a reason, and that started to present a challenge with the definition we had all come to agreement on the way we were forming, and then realized, well, wait a second, well, what if the traffic stop is meant to be an officer initiated stop and not like for any other reason, not a collision response or because they heard a recent report that there's a specific type of vehicle, then what does pre-existing knowledge mean?
Well, my experience, if you work in a small community and you know a lot of the people that are around there, if you see somebody driving that you personally removed their driver's license a couple of hours before, a day ago, that's reason for a stop. So that may fall into that. But then again, that's also probable cause, right? So
Exactly.
I think that it adds an other for officers to be like, well, or the directed traffic stop situation, or a BOLO, that sort of thing. But I think you get back to reasonable suspicion and probable cause on all those things anyhow.
Yeah, I tend to agree, but yeah, it really threw a wrench in we thought we had gotten so far.
I
and
know,
we started
and
talking
I
about
doubted
that.
it all after that.
Yeah, and then we were like, we'll just talk about it in the meeting in a couple weeks.
Well,
There's so many doors that could open.
Yeah,
Like, we could set a rule and probably every one of us could come up with an other.
and really,
What
it's-
if?
especially with the definition of motor vehicle stop, I mean, if you're wanting to close some of those doors, you've got to change kind of some of the fields of data that can be collected. And then it's like, do we even want to go down that road of recommending doing that? If we continue to stay in the box that we've got in terms of what is being collected and how it's being collected, it kind of narrows our ability to standardize some things, so they have to come out some recommendations of, changing things like pre-existing knowledge, define that or take it out. Put it into a small box or take it out, otherwise you're always gonna open up the doors for reasonable suspicion, probable cause with the pre-existing knowledge.
Well, and it's meaningless data if we can't define what it actually means.
And some of the conversations from one subcommittee would bleed over into, obviously what gets reported as a traffic stop bleeds over into the discussion that the search committee had on, okay, I stopped the driver for a traffic violation, I deal with that, but the passenger is the one that gets searched, arrested, and I can guarantee you, because I know some, there are agencies that all of that is reported on the stop. Yes, I made an arrest, yes, I made a search. It has nothing to do with the race and ethnicity of the driver. So now we have, this person described on the primary ticket that led to the stop, but all of these domino effect things because of the stop that actually did to another person whose race, ethnicity, and gender has not been reported. And so it really is, you'll have quite a task ahead of you.
I think what was mentioned earlier about this focusing on the driver will fix that to the extent that it's possible to be fixed. That's really the concern, is on the data regarding the driver specifically, and everyone else in the vehicle should be ignored. Kind of what I saw is on the reason for the stop, there's 4 categories. They don't look like they're in law, so I'm assuming they were built by whatever T. Cole committee created the forms. So I know it's not per, but we got violation law, pre-existing knowledge, and then the traffic violation stuff, moving in vehicle. Is it like 98% of the moving traffic violations and vehicle traffic violations, are those self-initiated? And are 98% of the violation of the law and pre-existing knowledge not self-initiated? And the reason why I'm asking is that it just becomes continue to collect that data, just separate an analysis. Because then you're just analyzing moving traffic violations and vehicle traffic violations, and you're ignoring the rest from an annual reporting standpoint, not every traffic stop standpoint. But I don't know the answer to that question. Are they both really murky? Because if they are, then it's.
I think they're pretty murky.
Yeah.
I think if you're initiating a traffic stop because you were trying to develop probable cause for pre-existing knowledge and you're not reporting that, how do you then split it out? I have a lot of concerns about asking officers to make a decision as to whether it's supposed to be reported or not. I could see that introducing a layer of uncertainty that we're trying to avoid with the definitions. I don't know. You guys may or may not share that.
A thought that I had, I think that's a really interesting perspective, is why are we asking for the reason of the stop if we are going to so clearly define what a motor vehicle stop is? If it's driver initiated, do we need to break that down any further? Does that question even need to exist?
Yeah, that
It's
part
in the
is
law, it says like reason for the stop,
There it
but it doesn't
is.
say what.
Well-
Doesn't give the 4 categories, does it?
contraband or other evidence in plain view, probable cause or reasonable suspicion that existed.
Yeah.
It
That's
says
for
or.
search.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the
not
search.
Reason for the
No,
stop.
it just
I
says
don't-
reason for stop.
It
Okay.
just-
Those aren't defined.
And
Right.
I
One
think
of the sections is reason for the stop.
That's all it says.
That's all it says.
It was left open in.
That's why I was thinking the
Yeah.
categories were developed somewhere along the line. Okay.
I tell you, it really threw a lot of us off when it first came out, and it's like moving traffic violation, vehicle traffic violation. And then we said, okay, well, how are we gonna define the difference between those two? Well, we'll just have to figure it out. But I think that we could simplify that. It's like a violation of, traffic code, transportation code, or a violation of another code. But it's still not gonna give you what did you have your level of proof at that point, your reasonable suspicious probable cause, it doesn't really matter. Other than if you were called there to do it, it's not that it's no longer a discretionary stop. That is still a
We're
dark.
closer to being accurate on the numbers though, doing it like if it's most moving vehicle violations or traffic violations is a self-initiated stop.
Yeah.
Our numbers are closer to being right by using that dynamic than the other. Like I think we still gotta do it because, I think we still want that information. But that's how we report it. We're closer to the number. I don't know that you're ever gonna get, I don't think you're ever gonna get perfect.
And that's what we have to get comfortable with, because just from a research standpoint, if it's 95% accurate, it's awesome. We're not gonna get all the nuances, there's gonna be error. There's error in that finger thing you said, because we do reports for agencies, and there's 6 errors, but it's out of 2,000 stops, so whatever. You're gonna have errors. You've got, I'm gonna go with thousands of officers across the state punching in this data, there's gonna be just human error done. But there's also gonna be error on the periphery of some of this gray area, but if we can get it to 95% accurate, then we're good.
And I'm
That's
assuming,
not a specific number, that's just like a made-up number.
I'm assuming T. Cole doesn't have some kind of audit process to see how accurate those reports are. Y'all just accept it as they are.
Yeah, we're not, we're supposed to collect and catalog the data so researchers can draw down. We're not in the position of researcher or analyst in this case yet.
So I guess we're making an assumption that they're not, and I agree that it probably is, but we don't know how accurate the reports actually are throughout the state.
I think Dr. Fritsch points out something, if we go back to the calls for service notion, if that became a reason for the stop, I think we could add in definitions what constitutes call for service, bank robbery, suspect identified, be on the lookout for, whatever. So I think, at least in my mind, y'all may be on the right track with that. If we wanna separate self-initiated traffic stops from calls for service, that may be the place to do it. Is this traffic all gets reported? So anytime an officer makes a physical traffic stop in the bare definition, because it's a very open, you stop a car, that's a traffic stop. Not a bicycle, just you stop a car, that's a traffic stop. So if we report all of those, and then perhaps if you look at calls for service with subsequent definitions of that, and I've heard the same thing just before on okay, I got a traffic violation, or I got a moving violation of vehicle. It's always been diced for us as, okay, this is a driver operator problem, this is a taillight vehicle, license plate, whatever. The way that's normally, I've heard that differentiated. I think maybe you could capture good data to where as a researcher you could separate, maybe I only wanna look at this, I only wanna look at things that are traffic violations, because that lends itself to being more officer initiated. 95% would be grand if we got 95% accuracy across 2,800 agencies. We could write research. That's just, I think, at least in my mind, a potential solution for what researchers are getting on the back end. And that gets closer to Sheriff, what you said about everything's going into the system, and that's probably a healthy thing. Everything gets reported, everybody gets used to reporting. We just ask where we have the leverage, where it's not specific in statute, we can ask that question differently, or give different options in answering that question, I guess.
So I guess the next question is, where do we go from here with that, with the information that you've provided? And that what we've discussed here today with the motor vehicle stops. Is it something there to where we want to attempt to define that or go back to a subcommittee and come back to us with the recommendation of a definition or definitions?
I'm leaning towards a subcommittee follow-up with a draft language for the definitions of those stop reasons. Then we would have a basis to start in the next meeting to go over and maybe wordsmith.
Yep, yeah, no, I tend to agree. I mean, we can go back and in subcommittee, we can define these things. And I love the idea of the traffic versus call for service, however that ends up getting termed, but basically separating those two. And we could work on defining that and definitions of each category underneath that, defining it clearly, the moving versus the vehicle equipment versus whatever we decide to do for subcategories under call for service. We'll definitely go back and our committee will come back with definitions on that to present in the next meeting.
It's probably a good strategy for all of the next ones that we're about to talk about. Because if we start, the next thing would be, what are we including as motor vehicle stops? Not just the reason for the stop,
Yeah,
but
we
in
can-
terms of vehicle, right? So we had some talk last meeting about some folks including pedestrian stops, right? So I think the guidance that we received from TCOL is that it is a traffic stop of a motor vehicle, right? So if somebody's driving their lawnmower down the road, we're reporting it. If someone's riding their bike, we're not. And to the extent that we align with I think the NCIC definition of motor vehicle is the same as the Texas, but I should probably let you guys verify that. But a definition of a vehicle would be one as well. Do you know what was next in terms of definition on your list, or is there one or two others that you might want to meet about?
In terms of the motor vehicle stop itself,
Your committee group.
I think that's it for that. Now, the other thing that we were looking to define or have a recommendation for was the location. How are we going to label whatever roadway that you have stopped this motor vehicle on? You know, in the instance, for example, you know, your State Highway 10 for us in Hearst is also West Hearst Boulevard, our local road. So, you know, there's really just two options on it. Either you go with kind of the hierarchy or the lowerarchy, right? So do you do it like you do CR3s and interstate all the way down to private property, or do you do it the other way, which is more beneficial for the analysis of the data?
Mr. Grissom brought up a good point in our meeting that we kind of need to know what we're looking for, because the rural versus urban is that more important than the hierarchy of the roadway. We get that on a crash report, the hierarchy of the roadway is important, but for the stop data is the urban and rural more important. So do we want to, I guess we kind of wanted to find out what the intent is, maybe from the legislature, I guess, to what are we wanting to know? And
From an analysis standpoint, you'd wanna do bottom up. So you'd wanna know it's a city street, not highway, whatever it is. But
yeah,
I don't
that
know
makes
if that's what the
sense.
legislature wanted, but
so
from
if
an
it's
analysis
for
standpoint.
analysis, then we probably want to go bottom up.
I agree.
And
Okay, I agree. For analysis.
that brings up another point. We could, if it was possible, we could notate both, and that captures more data, but I don't know what that would require to, like, if it was a state highway and a local road, then for analysis, we would have that information on both, but I don't, that might be more of a computer technical kind of.
Yeah, it might be a challenge. So I agree from an analysis perspective. I do think that lower up is probably the preferable. If you're in my opinion, location goes to speak to where we are enforcing traffic laws. And to the extent that you are then encountering contraband or whatever, is it local to your city or is it flowing through? I think that I would lean towards low up as a recommendation. And I almost, if we didn't set a hierarchy where it was, here's the order, the first that applies, maybe what about how it is enforced by the agency? So the example you gave that was a state highway you're enforcing just the local part for your agency. Does that change anything operationally? The type of road that you would consider it?
I'm not real clear what you're asking. I think at this point, to be honest, I think my officers are probably, it's each guy's checking what he wants to check. And I don't really go back and like micro analyze where we're making those stops, or because when you run your racial profiling report, there's really not enough information to look. Like if we're looking for, if we're making more stops on residential streets versus main thoroughfares, then we probably wouldn't look at the motor stop data for that information because it's too bland.
I think we should set the recommendation, the parameters, because if we're looking for consistency, whether it's consistency at the officer level or consistency across agencies to get to a statewide analysis, you can't just let officers, and then it's gonna obviously move up, decide, is this a city street or is this just give the recommendation. It goes from city street to whatever.
Well, I think that's what we were getting to, because both of y'all have brought that up, that if we're dependent upon the officers to decide, is this reportable or not reportable, I think the officers are gonna go on the side of caution. They're gonna be like, you know what, I'm gonna report everything because I don't wanna get in trouble for not reporting something. So we're gonna get everything. So there's gotta be some kind of instruction, I think.
Yeah, every field for an end product is gonna have to be explicitly defined. Talking about location, we even discussed that the location of stop, is it where the violation occurred or is it the physical location that the stop ended? Because I know, at least from my agency, looking at our report, we've reported that some stops have been on private property. And I know we're not running traffic on private property, but the officer is sitting there and they're like, well, we're in a parking lot right now, so they hit private property. And we have different officers doing things different ways.
That's a really good point. Is there any I tend
Now
to think that
somebody
it
explain to me
starts
why we're stopping on private property, because I see it, I'm like, what are we doing on private property?
Right.
Gotcha.
It's because they're
So it's
putting
really
where
location of violation.
They're in the HEB parking lot.
Gotcha, okay.
That's exactly what's happening.
The question as it stands is, you know, street address or approximate location of the stop, even though it says street address. And the available answers are city street, US highway, state highway, county road, private property, or other. And kind of to go on with what Chief Rush said in the meeting is you know, US DOT wants interstates and all that because they're heat mapping crashes on federally funded roadways. And we perceived, or the kind of speaking, I was with, but not part of the subcommittee. My interpretation is we're trying to look at, you know, the part of town. So Main Street in small towns is a US highway that takes a left, but it's still Main Street going forward. So if I wanna know what's happening on city streets, you know, I would get two different responses depending on where the violation, or as you said, where the stop occurred on Main Street. And so I think with the question as it is, we go back to the definitions, the definition dictionary to say, here's how to report that. I don't think, at least in my mind, don't think the question's corrupt. I think we need to define how we answer the question more without, unless you see something added, it's city, county, state, US highway, private property, basically. You know,
So what we're truly trying to get with the question is what kind of neighborhood we're stopping people in, right? Generally, right? What kind of area we're stopping in. And I think if we try to define it based on if it's a city street that's also a state highway, but in this section over here, it's part interstate, we're never gonna get 100% consistency of reporting with that. I think if we boil it back down to really what we're trying to ask is what sort of zone or what sort of area are you in? And just ask the question, are you in a commercial zone? Are you in a residential zone? Are you in a primary like industrial area, or are you rural? In having a whole separate question from that, and that way we can take the roadway system out of it entirely. Because even if you're stopping people on a city street, you may be in a city street section of town that has no residents in it. It's just a street going from, you know, HEB to Costco or something like that, and there's no housing there. And you're not stopping people coming out of their house. They're going around their daily business. Because thinking about it, of all the different places I worked, like there's areas where there's business interstates running through, and it's all oil field equipment. And then there's business interstates that run right outside some housing developments on there. But there's, you know, traffic laws, right, doing stop, stand, or park within a commercial district and things like that. So we have areas where we talk about what sort of area of town you're in. Maybe we define that, make a recommendation that something like that be added and deconflict some of that entirely. I know that's a little left field turn from the discussion, but if we're trying to answer a question with data instead of trying to fit a square peg in a round hole with it, just let's ask the question directly.
Daniel, another question. Should we do the whole agenda item as one vote, or can we take a vote within this?
You can vote within.
well, I think you can send it back to the subcommittee without a motion to
Okay.
act on.
Okay.
You can reload your subcommittees with more instruction and is that okay, Dan?
Yeah, no, that works too. You can send it back.
Yeah, so Kevin, you have good, I think you've got good instruction for
Yes, sir.
y'all's meeting. Y'all can get together and set up the meeting time, date and time.
We'll come back with recommendations.
Nathan, and I think Dan will correct me if I get off base, that's why I made Jessica sit between. But from our perspective, what I as your liaison would like to see is the committee come with a report / work product that includes recommendations, and I don't think there has to be a lot of voting until, you know, that's presented. You can kick it back and forth, subcommittees bring the product back, you guys do what you just did. And either re-energize them or say, absolutely, we agree with your assessment, put that to writing. So I don't think there needs to be a lot of, I move we do X, or I move, you know, we do Y in terms of vote taking. But certainly the final work product needs to be the committee's stamp of approval that this is where we think TCOL should go moving forward. So
I think that's good direction for y'all subcommittee that we can look at next time we come back. Sure. So going back to the search and contraband, if we want to get into more depth of what your report was earlier as a group, as a committee.
Sure. So just to kind of re-summarize, we talked about defining the categories clearly. There's gonna be some sections in there that are not clearly defined. Defining that when the search is conducted, who are we conducting the search on or the vehicle for the driver. And whether contraband is found relative to the driver and the arrest of such. But yeah, mainly ours went over defining the contraband types.
I think part of the, I don't, is there a difference between drugs and drug paraphernalia? Does paraphernalia go into other, or drugs and drug paraphernalia go into drugs? Cause I think that's what we discussed, right? It's
Yeah.
like where does that go? So I guess it is just the definition then.
Yeah, and I would recommend it go into paraphernalia, go into drugs. But I'm here from other opinions.
I mean, those categories are TCOL specified. Well, somebody besides the law specified, because the reasons for the search are law specified, so we can't mess with those 5. But the description of contrabands are created internally, so it could be like drugs or paraphernalia, just as the category. And then that clears that up.
Drugs and drug paraphernalia.
I
Yeah, and then
think
you
so
don't
too,
need
'cause
the-
we're
yeah.
not getting like 2 counts, right? It's 1 count, so instead of having drug and paraphernalia counted if we were to expand to multiple types of contraband, grouping those and including it as part of the definition would maybe add that clarity.
I mean, if you think about the probable cause search for, because you smell drugs, or you have an indication there's drugs, or a dog hits or something like that, canine hit, and you find paraphernalia, well, that's kind of reinforces what you smelled, saw, or the dog smelled or saw. So.
You mentioned in your report a possible addition of contraband types, maybe like human smuggling or something like that, I thought I heard.
I don't know if we would include that as a type, but include some things in other with it, where it would go. I don't know if that's warrants its whole
Frequent enough
own
occurrence, yeah.
Yeah, a whole section, but I mean, that's just talking with some of our officers, that's one of those things, they're like, what do I do with this? It's like I searched the vehicle, I didn't find evidence so much as I found people that their presence and existence in the manner that they're being trafficked or traveled is in and of itself a element of a crime. So is that evidence being found? Is that contraband found? And we say yes for our own reporting, and we put it in other. But having a definition would, I think, allow researchers to consider that scenario. When they're going through and say, oh, there's a lot of other around the border. Maybe has to do with human smuggling.
Cause I pulled the 2024 data, and so others used quite a bit, cause of the contraband discovered in 24, 12% was other.
Yeah.
So from a research, I don't know what that means. I mean, I'd be speculating to say what it means. So I think giving examples in there, because I think we were like currency, we wanted to add like currency and financial instruments.
So
I think weapons was clear.
weapons
then
is clear.
Yeah, and then stolen property, and then alcohol.
Open alcohol containers.
Alcohol containers, yeah.
Where there may not be alcohol anymore. It's open alcohol containers. But yeah, the currency, financial instruments, so stolen credit cards, things like that.
So did they expand in that topic area? I mean, the category?
Well, and then we have stolen property already, but we don't have like criminal instruments, like burglary tools, things like that you would find. There's a lot of things that could fall into other if you're searching a car. And say you're in a high burglary area and you got some indications and build some reasonable suspicion that these guys might be out, cutting catalytic converters off of cars. And then you go search it and you find a Sawzall, a bunch of catalytic converters and, some other things. You would obviously mark stolen property, but you've also found the criminal instruments as well.
Yeah, I think, going back to 12% other, I realize from a statistician standpoint, that's probably large. But from the different types, if we go down the trail of trying to parse other into even 5 categories, you're still gonna end up with another.
But it is a big category, cause it's the second biggest category, 66% drugs, then 12.2% is other. And then a little bit next is the alcohol, and then weapons is 6%, currency is less than 1%. And stolen property is 1.5%, so it's getting dumped on, I don't know what is getting dumped in there,
Yeah,
but it's
I
getting
mean,
dumped on.
there's all kind of stuff that fits in other, bodies alive and dead. You know, a homicide victim found in the trunk is another. Now hopefully we're not finding a lot of homicide victims. But, you know, you've got criminal instruments, you know, when you, if you, most of the other is evidentiary, but not contraband. It's evidence of a crime somewhere, you know, so it's the burglary tools or, you know, it can be some of those, they could be precursors for drugs, but it is not in and of itself drugs. So I'm running off with anhydrous ammonia. I bought it, not stolen, but doing it because I'm making meth. So we could expand the drug category to reduce the 12% if precursors that people are looking for go in that. I'm a little afraid of, you know, going back, Doctor, to your statement on it, we're giving these officers more discretion to, you know, either making it more complex for them to dice or to me, alcohol is very small in most people's world because it is not contraband. The possession of alcohol in and of itself is not criminal. In the context of a DWI where we're doing open containers or, you know, an open container violation, alcohol, but I went home the other night from Specs. And if I'd have been searched, they could have said alcohol, but I wasn't creating any alcohol violations. It is if it's a minor in possession. It is, you know, so there are times when alcohol is evidence, but it does not surprise me that alcohol is a very small portion. So we're open to, these were the original categories where we tried to lump what people were getting on traffic stops into searches subsequent to traffic stops, really. So we'd be open to expansion. Or I really think the work y'all are doing to redefine things, to define what goes where will add more value. Both on the collection end, but also if I'm looking at this on the researcher end, I've got this data dictionary to go, okay, these are the things that should be in here.
If there's such a huge disparity between the four existing types, then maybe 3 of those types are just not are no longer appropriate. Maybe some of those need to be different.
Yeah, I think we discussed that and general consensus was they're okay with the categorizations. Because since this one's not the law-based one, it can be 2 things, it can be 12 things. Wouldn't recommend 12. It can be whatever you want it to be, so
If we wanted
there's
to
options.
stay within the same footprint of questions, maybe there are just a couple more types of contraband that we could swap out if we were thinking we would get numbers that are more meaningful.
I think the suggestions all fit the categories here. They were all broadening them to what's gonna shrink other. I mean, when you say alcohol count open container and drugs count paraphernalia, you're gonna solve a lot of this without
You're
creating
getting some
new
of the other up
categories,
there.
yeah.
Yeah, and
You are.
in looking at the stolen property, that's probably an incredibly small onboarding section.
5% of them
Yeah.
was stolen property.
So,
And that number could lower if we change the definition of what a traffic stop is.
right, so if we say, we could redefine that, and you say, as you say, use the same footprint and say stolen property as well as burglary tools or criminal instruments and proceeds. And that way, you're pulling things out of other, you're leaving other, we're always gonna have that.
The
But
alien.
yeah, yeah, and or receipts from, Whataburger at 2 a.m. because that's what you got them on camera on. But there's always something to go in there. But moving those things out, because while it's important to know if someone's got stolen property, it's also equally important in that same vein of thinking is the tools to get the stolen property, to do the thieving, masks and tapes and all that as well.
Very, very much agree with that. I think there's a lot of value there. We also, where do you guys include like forged documents or like multiple driver's license, or would that be another category that perhaps grouped into currency or money or financial?
Yeah, we could say currency and fraud, paper crimes.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, typically those sorts of things stand on their own as like forged documents or fraudulent items. But you start getting into forged checks, now you're running into the territory of, is that a financial instrument? And now, there's a little bit of bleed over there. So is currency of huge significance academically when we're talking about racial profiling report, traffic stop reporting? Or is it more important to know that this person was found to actually have something they're not supposed to have after we search them based on the opinion of an officer or the discretion of an officer, something like that? So I think we can lump some things together because we're just still defining what was found. And at least it's not all lumped in the ever hated, other category. At least, when you're looking at it, okay, this category here is, financial instruments, forged documents, and white collar type things. And then the other category would be stolen property, robbery tools, burglary tools, and proceeds from a property theft or property damage.
Some of the other, I'm sorry.
The other thing with this data capture, we've gotta not lose sight of the fact that we're trying to see if racial profiling is occurring, not doing crime analysis on what's getting captured in searches on the side of the road. And so one of the things that the subcommittee spent a good deal of time on was the potentially divorcing searches involving passengers, or all these things involving passengers from the traffic stop reporting. Because I'm driving, I run a stop sign, you stop me, Jessica's in the front seat, she has a warrant unrelated to the traffic stop or the reason or anything else. It's just serendipitous. If I'm the patrolman, I happen to run her, she comes back with a warrant. Those are getting reported as arrests from the traffic stop. But arguably, one worldview is those are not related, just serendipitous. The other is those are absolutely related. And so I think that's one of the distinctions we're gonna need the subcommittee, ultimately the committee as a whole, to come down on one side or the other of that argument. Are we all in on all searches related to the stop, all arrests related to the stop? And the compounding factor to that is, if that's a yes, what happens when race, ethnicity, and those things we're required to report on the stop are not the same? Are we reporting the driver? Are we reporting the arrestee at that point? And so I think there's maybe some more work to be done in that lane.
Just a rough estimate, what percentage of stops move off of the driver onto someone else in the vehicle?
Quite a few of ours. We document passengers as additional people. They
Okay.
get counted as if they're their own
So
stop.
it's a separate.
So we're reporting, and we're only reporting passengers if we engaged them. So the driver gets reported.
Got it.
If we engage the passenger because we're gonna search them or something, then they get reported as a stop. One of the talking points that we often have with council or other folks is the hit rate, right? How often are we finding something when we're conducting the search? And I think that, yes, those actions are not necessarily attributed to the traffic stop directly or the driver always, but I do think part of the purpose in maintaining the ability to have discretion in traffic stops for law enforcement is as both a traffic enforcement and a crime deterrent. You're engaging folks and preventing and or identifying that you otherwise wouldn't have had an opportunity to encounter. And so I guess the 3 points that we're looking at, right, is one, do the actions of the passenger matter in the context for which we're talking today? Two, does the attribution of the race to that person and keeping those actions tied or wrapping it up as a traffic stop count, change how we would define those?
I have a quick question, because I wanna make sure I understand the way you described it. So officer stops somebody, if they engage with 3 people, in your statistics, that would look like 3 unique, distinct traffic stops.
In ours, it would.
'Cause I don't think there's a lot of agencies that are doing that. I think you would be an outlier.
I think it becomes the issue of what's collected internally for an agency that's then analyzed some way for the agency but then what gets reported out into your system. I think there has to be greater clarity on that. Whether it's because it's gonna make stops balloon if you were to do that. So there has to be clarity on the reporting side of what gets.
But y'all report all of those to us in your aggregate data.
We do currently, yes. If we
See,
engage.
I think you would be an outlier compared to the way most agencies are reporting that. Yeah. And so I think that is a fabulous example of where we need to, or where you need to do the work.
So
Is that the correct way to do it, so everybody does it that way? Or do we need to dissuade you not to do that because we're looking at that initial stop?
Or does that need to be a vendor specification that that you identify the driver and you separate the passengers so the output is only drivers?
We have a label, that's how we do it.
I'm assuming DPS has the most stops of everybody, so what do y'all do? I'm just
So
wondering how.
we're in a similar boat, and it all ties back to, how do you ensure that the data is collected? It's better to collect more data than not enough and run the risk of not fulfilling your obligations. So on our ticket, the actual form, officer fills it out on every single one, crash, passenger, on a traffic stop or whatnot, and we filter it out based on if they are flagged as a driver in that vehicle or not.
So it becomes a reporting issue, cause agencies can collect whatever data they want.
Oh, absolutely.
But then it becomes what's reported to
Right.
all needs the clarity.
We set the traffic stops, or not the traffic stops aside, the crash
Driver.
investigations aside, the commercial inspections aside, things like that. And then we pull out drivers on traffic stops.
Okay, so you would only be reporting the driver-based information.
As long as we can determine it, right?
Sure.
Do you include all contraband if it's found on the passenger, or do you limit what's then reported to the
I
driver?
think it's a little Wild West, honestly.
Yeah,
I don't think we've ever been able to give very clear guidance. It's like, our trooper's pretty black and white. If the box says contraband found, yes or no, did I find contraband today on this stop, yes or no? That's how they're gonna report it.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry. how are y'all sorting out what you're reporting? When our guys write a ticket, it dumps into the RMS system and it computer magic goes into the racial profiling report, right? How are y'all sorting all this stuff out?
I have data analysts.
They have
that-
analysts that do it, yeah.
Canyon,
That's
Texas
the
has no
reality of it.
analysts.
And
Most agencies
sounds
don't
like
have
the
those people to
system
do it.
gives the
So we, in our program, we do have the boxes that an officer has to fill out. And then we have a reporting database that it all drops into. And then when we run our data, we run our query, and that query is structured to exclude certain things. So with our vendor, it said you have enough analysts, you can write your own queries, but they did offer to us to set up some standard reporting, just in case we need it, and we're like, no, thank you. But I think that would be a vendor to vendor, what options and level of service they offer to their customers. But that would be something I would see if you can ask them to do.
Just a short answer, you're collecting a separate box to say this is a passenger.
Yeah, there's
this
a
is
role.
Crash, this is,
Yeah. Each people in our system, whether it's a case report or a crash or a traffic stop or an inspection, they have a role code that it's assigned to.
That's where it's differentiating, you can print all drivers.
If you have multiple kinds of data collection, you need a variable that distinguishes and filters out those subsets. So in this instance, we collect racial profiling data on handheld ticket writers or within our RMS. We combine those data sets. But we don't collect anything else as part of that data in that data set. So the citation data is collected, but it's not submitted along with, we're not filtering any of that out. We do have an option we could filter out passengers, but we have not. We've included them historically.
And like our ticket writers, we have traffic, or you can select traffic, but it doesn't break it down to driver or not, but I'm sure the vendor could easily add that.
Well, we've only recently, and I should clarify that, we've only recently been able to do that, 3-4 years ago. Every single piece of paper was a traffic stop, didn't matter where it came from. If it came from a crash or it came from whatnot, we didn't really have a way of defining it. We had no idea who the driver was, and we were working with our own in-house, it was a homebrew citation writer. So we'd have to work with our own in-house IT department to try to squeeze check boxes in here or there, trying to figure it all out, but that's how we handle the problem.
There's just a couple more of the variables that were in that second subcommittee section. I think it had to do with, was a search conducted, did an arrest result from that search? And
I think we
maybe one or two others. Did you have any other discussion?
Yeah, so for the, did an arrest result from the search, or did an arrest occur because of the search? I think we wanna clearly define that as, was the driver arrested as a result of the search? Was contraband found? I can't remember what our recommendation was on that, if, because the hit rate, if you find evidence in the vehicle and it's underneath the passenger seat, you still found evidence on the search that you conducted. I think the question of whether or not you arrested the driver based on that answers, is the driver gonna be associated with that contraband hit? We don't wanna screw up the contraband hit rate and say, well, no evidence was found in this search. When you're like, no, there was a kilo of coke found in this search, it just happened to not be the driver's. So I think the evidence found should be just in the vehicle, within the scope of the search. And then was the driver arrested as a result of that as well. There was one more thing on it, I can't remember.
I think you covered, because we had, like, right now it says the discovery of contraband result in arrest, we were just gonna add up driver.
Yeah, arrested driver.
Clarify that. And then the contraband discovered. The only thing I have is the search, the yes, no, who, when it goes yes, it's a search of the driver, is what we were talking about.
And then the reason for search, clearly defining when you have multiple reasons for search, do you select multiple options? Or do we give guidance and direction to say, what was your initial or primary reason for search, right? Because you could have a probable cause search that then you do a search incident to arrest, and then you do an inventory of that vehicle afterwards. Where you have 3 different types of searches that you're authorized to do. But for the purposes of this this law, this program is what was the officer thinking? Officer discretion, or the what guided them to do a search of the vehicle. So our recommendation was the initial reason for search. Open for thoughts on that
We do initial as well.
with the initial reason for search instead of just reason for search.
So you guys have some good direction that you can bring back to the committee during the next meeting. And now, Dr. Cummins, we can discuss ours further. I know you had, I don't remember exactly what it was, but you had a question.
Yeah. Injury, we talked about injury, definition of injury, bodily injury, force resulting in injury, that question. Maybe we start there. Do you have the definition of bodily injury just in front of you? I wanna say
It's got a
it's
laptop. Can't be
the
far.
complaint of injury, it's injury and or complaint of injury is what I believe. And
That's a good paraphrase.
what
Yes.
I raised for the discussion was complaint of injury. We document a lot of options related to force we use. We're gonna document our use of force if we do forced handcuffing, and that's all we do. And so the question was, if someone says, ow, that hurts, what's TCOL's expectation in terms of, does that now constitute what we would document as force and then complaint of injury? And I do think that that's an extreme interpretation.
Well, that is one that is driven by statute. Because it goes to 1.07 of the penal code where all the definitions are
Yeah.
found. And it says that's the one we should be using. So application of handcuffs, somebody screams, bumps, bruises, all of that meet the definition of bodily injury. So I don't think we can stray far in narrowing that beyond the definition that the code points to. So I think the expectation is you would report any complaints of that. A lot of times, the problem with traffic stop data is it's captured real time at the event. 2 days later, somebody comes up with a photo saying, hey, the handcuffs are too tight, here's the thing. Tying that back to the original data that's already been captured and lives somewhere else. Not heartache on our end, it's heartache on your end. But I don't, unless the legal team's got any other guidance, I think the statute points to a pretty clear definition.
Could you put at the time of the arrest to clarify that last issue you brought up? Cause you don't know, it got hurt, it started hurting 3 days later, but can you,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying, that bodily injury at the time of arrest, as far as clarity goes?
Yeah, I think what's most commonly reported is if somebody gets hurt requiring medical attention. Or I take somebody to the jail and the jail refuses them because I gotta go get them checked out before I come back to the jail. So I have faith that the higher levels of force, I went to arrest somebody, I got in a fight, that probably gets reported with relative reliability. I think it's that kind of what you're pointing out is ow, ooh, cause physical pain. Those things are probably getting lost somewhere just because it's a systemic problem, not nobody's trying to hide or keep that from the data. I just don't think it's clean if somebody comes in 2 days later and they got a bruise on their elbow. They're attributing it to the event. I doubt that catches up with the original report.
Yeah, I would imagine the average frontline officer does not realize that the bodily injury relates back to the penal code definition of it. You know, like, yeah, they'll go to an assault call and know that a complaint of pain is bodily injury, but they're not tracking that bodily injury on the racial profiling. Motor vehicle stop data is the same definition. I can promise you that's not happening.
I talked to a guy just yesterday about it from a different agency, and I think a lot of us are probably doing the same thing. If you're not having to fill out a use of force report, then that's probably not getting reported.
Yeah.
I think
That's pretty common.
you gotta shed some blood to get paid.
Yeah, I think because the definition of use of force isn't defined, right? Maybe just clarity around the expectation or how we can articulate that to be attributed. I do think that would make a big difference in terms of reported data. It tends to be a question that comes up frequently for us.
And I think it probably gets pretty close to legislative intent. They point back to the 107 definition because it's clean and easy and it's already out there. But I think their intent is, are we harming people?
Correct.
As a result of these, and trying to tie that back to ultimately race and ethnicity. You know, or certain groups getting searched at a higher frequency, or certain groups getting arrested at a higher frequency, and now are certain groups getting injured at a higher frequency. And I think Chief's right. Most agencies have a use of force report threshold where the paperwork changes if the following things happen. And I want to believe that that's getting reported in the data. If EMS has to carry the guy away from the scene, that is probably happening with great regularity.
The next question that's in that section has to do with racial profiling complaints to the agency. And I think the subsets are how many complaints were received, how many disciplinary actions were handed out? Yeah, disciplinary. Is that those three?
Yeah, total number of complaints, complaints resulted in disciplinary action and did not result. So really it's total number, discipline, no discipline.
There was a question that came up for us on the total number, whether it would be include only sustained sites or if it would include all allegations.
Arguably, especially with recent legislative intent on some other bills that have been coming out, they would, if we asked downtown, it would be all complaints of racial profiling. Now, I think that in and of itself narrows it. So I think the complaint on its face would have to be that all of this happened to me because your officer was racially profiling. And so, and again, this is not reported by the individual officers on the side of the road. This is separately captured data that the agencies, I'd like to believe they're doing a good job of this. I think the weak points in the whole system is the officer on the side of the road when he or she's trying to figure out what goes in which block. So they ask the sergeant, who's clueless too, and they do the best they can. I want to believe that agencies are appropriately capturing this stuff, but I hope they're doing it, you know. Again, in my mind, if the chief gets a complaint on one of his officers and the complaint says your officer was rude to me on a traffic stop, that's not in this data. The complaint would literally have to lodge the charge of I was racial profiled and, you know, I want you to investigate, so, and I presume you would, and, but I think it's all complaints, cause it does ask for what complaints, which presumes an investigation, what resulted in discipline, which did not. And I think it's a measure that they're trying to get a feel for whether the city is, or county, or whomever is actually looking into complaints.
So, complaint allegations of racial profiling that have been filed as a formal complaint. I think including those, whether they've been through the investigative process or even if they turn out to be unfounded or exonerated and all those sorts of things, shows a good pattern. It's a whole lot better to say we've had 50 complaints of it, but none of them have been founded, than to say we've never ever had a complaint of racial profiling, and therefore none of them have been founded. Like, I think it shows a good pattern. But then again, our OIG investigates all that. They just give me the numbers to report, so I'm good with that.
You know,
So I'll take them. All right.
yeah.
Get some good direction there.
I think so. I think so for definitions.
My only question is, who's handling was race known prior to the stop? Where does that fall in? 'Cause I always get that question,
We
so
can
I'm just
take it.
curious.
We can
Is
take it.
is anybody looking at it? Was race known prior to the stop?
Oh,
Do you have any commentary around it? Any changes to how it might be phrased or?
No, usually it's a low percentage that is yes. And so typically it's my understanding and talking to people, it's my understanding that was race known basically at the decision to make the stop. And I don't know if people vary on how they're interpreting that, but and then that fits with racial profiling too. It's like you decided to take an action, so at that point of the action of, I'm gonna stop that vehicle, did you know the race ethnicity of the person? Not, I followed them for 3 blocks and then I saw them at one point in time. Not that, so I mean, that's really it.
That's my understanding as well. Does anyone use it differently?
Yeah.
So,
I just get the questions from council that it seems like a low number. And it is, and then I have to explain it,
yeah,
that it's hard
it's
to
3%
know.
for, I mean,
Yeah, and that's
for us, so.
statewide, it's 3 to 4%.
I think it wouldn't hurt to add a clarifying statement in there,
Oh, sure.
to say, you know, at the point or before the decision of an officer to make the stop, was the race or ethnicity known of the driver? Because as Dr. Fritz said, we may follow them all the way around the HEB parking lot and, you know, or wait for backup to arrive and say, hey, I'm waiting for 3 more cars to come make this stop. And then actually turn the lights on, make the stop. We wanna know, is it possible that the race or ethnicity of that driver factored into the decision to make the stop? If the decision's already made, then that's not a factor in whether or not to make the stop or not.
Exactly.
I've got one more that I just found. So there's the question about, in the injury section, there's those questions about suspect injury, officer injury, or both. I have some confusion there. What I don't know, right, is does both include ones that you've reported in the single categories as well? So I had this many suspects, I had this many officers individually, but then this many incidents where both were harmed? Or is it intended to be sort of separated from that total where all of them add up to said total?
I remember right in the subcommittee, we said it'd be clear just to get rid of those, to literally just have was there injury and not separate it out, and include officer injury, because that could double count for some and not others.
Yeah, we talked about the ambiguity around it, whether agencies were collecting it as part of the racial profiling data, where could you attribute any one traffic stop to an officer injury? We're not. We have to then go into use of force data based on traffic stop. Did it result in injury from there, and do some matching. And then we also talked to the fact that sometimes officers get injured because force is used against them. And so does it add context to why force might also need to be used to contain a traffic stop?
Because from a reporting standpoint, it's tied to the race of the driver. It's the same thing with the search stuff that you talked about. Because the first, if you just look at race ethnicity, that's the driver. But then officer or both we don't know the race ethnicity of the officer. And so if we just do it where we combine them all, could be a black motorist, white officer, could be a white motorist, black, so we don't know.
Yeah.
So.
Talk about it more and bring it back next time if nobody else has any strong opinion one way or the other.
Any further discussion on agenda item number 5?
Just have an overarching encouragement as has been coming up numerous times, as we're thinking about these definitions and putting these to paper and talking through the categories, what to include, what to not, just continuing to come back to the why this exists. Are certain populations being affected at a higher rate of stops, arrests, contraband being found, injuries, and so continuing to frame the why of what we're including or not including, or how these definitions help under the umbrella of what the statute's asking for with addressing racial profiling. But that's what I'm hearing, and I think it's been helpful commentary on that. Anything from any of you guys before we move past this item?
Only thought I had, and I'm so sorry I have another meeting that I have to go to, but I was curious if the draft definitions, if there was a particular format that might be nice to have standardized across all 3 subcommittees. Like the question from the question set, the definition, and then in my mind, an example would be nice, and that kind of leans towards us creating training around it. But I don't know if there were any other points that we could collect while we're in there looking at each one from each subcommittee perspective, so.
Is there, yeah, if there's something that Nicole would, as far as format or whatever, that would be nice to
We could probably
provide.
generate a sample, just at least so we're coming back to the group next time with the same format, and then if we decide to tweak the format from there, those three columns I think are pretty appropriate and appropriate for where we are and the specificity of the conversation.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. My thoughts later might lend towards vendor support in terms of, this is a integer versus, that kind of stuff. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion on item number 5? If none, we'll move on to public comments. If there's anybody who would like to make a public comment, they're welcome to. If there's anybody? Alright. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. We have one motion to adjourn from Sheriff Kurt. Sorry.
We need the next meeting date.
I believe we already set them all up in advance.
Yeah. Our next meeting is March 4th.
March 4th, yeah. March 4th. Second the motion to adjourn.
We do have a second. And I'll take a vote. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? We are adjourned.